Hi, everyone. Today, let's talk about the markets. Then we'll get straight into the charts because markets went straight up today. I definitely did not trade well today. Again, going into the next day with no positions. If you like trading stocks and options and making money, definitely like and subscribe. I make videos like this every single day that the markets are open as well as Sundays, so make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Welcome to the Portfolio Bulletin. Let's get started. So the NASDAQ went up 2%, the Dow went up slightly, and everyone seems to think that the Fed is going to go 25 basis points, which, once again, we've talked about multiple times. I'm pretty surprised that the market is reacting so strongly to this. I kind of thought 25 basis points was the base case, but apparently that getting fully priced in is really driving the markets up, at least here in the short term. They say shares of Apple and Tesla gained quite a bit, part of why we talk about these two stocks pretty consistently on the channel. They seem to be drivers of the market here recently, and it's good to keep track of those. We also have semiconductors driving the markets pretty aggressively as well, pushing really strongly here today. And then they talk about what we said before. Investors seem to think the Fed is going to slow their rate hikes, especially with the weak retail sales that we had recently, once again showing that the economy is slowing. We also had Fed Governor Christopher Waller saying that he's in favor of a 25 basis point hike, pretty much putting the potential of a 25 basis point hike to 100% here recently. And that momentum is pushing the bulls to the upside. Of course, we are on the verge of earnings. We have a lot of big earnings this week. Microsoft tomorrow, IBM coming up, Tesla's on Wednesday, and then Visa and MasterCard, I believe, are Thursday. Definitely on the lookout for all of those. And then early next week, we have the FOMC meeting where we expect to get that full 25 basis points. I don't think they're going to pause like some people have been talking about. But if they did pause, that would be a rocket ship for the stock market, at least here in the short term. But right now, the base case is 25 basis points. Moving over to the charts, starting off with the S&P 500 on the daily chart here. It looks like we might have a breakout here. We did hold above the trend line, the big trend line that we've been talking about for a long time at this point. We did get through it on this previous retrace move from the December high. We had a short-term low, and then we pushed back above it, initiating that larger down move that we had. And there's certainly potential that this is another one of those fake outs. We're above it slightly. Maybe we push up to that previous high. We get the break, take out all the stops, and then we push back below these trends. Certainly a possibility, and you do have to be aware of that. But right now, the trend is bullish. Switching over to the double charts here with the 1 hour on the left chart, you can see what that looked like. That bigger push down, bottoming formation at the 200 on the hourly chart. And then since then, we pushed above this most recent high and above the trend line. It almost looks like we came in and retested it at this point. That retest is seeming to hold right now. And if this pushes up again here tomorrow, that's going to be pretty aggressive. And at that point, we do have to entertain the fact that this might be a paradigm change for this most recent larger downtrend that we've been stuck in pretty much for the last year. Moving over to the hour and the 4 hour on the NASDAQ. It's worth noting here that we do have a bit of a structure similar to the SPY where we have that low that initiated that strong rally, a basing formation, and then an additional very, very strong rally. Basically no down moves, really strong and powerful, all the way up to resistance once again. And right before Microsoft earnings, the day before, it looks like we're at resistance. So if Microsoft earnings come out weak, and that pushes the markets down, that definitely looks like manipulation at this point. You do have to be aware of that. We are at resistance. The NASDAQ not looking like it broke through resistance the same way that the SPY did. The NASDAQ has been weaker here recently, so it has a little bit more ground to cover before it does get up to that resistance. But really, it's going to depend on Microsoft earnings tomorrow and then Tesla earnings on Wednesday. If those come out poor and we start moving lower and then we get the 25 basis points early next week and they say some pretty hawkish things like they tend to do, then that could certainly push the markets lower. And this is kind of that manipulation move into the highs before we get the bigger sell-off. Moving over to the Russell and the Dow on the hourly chart, it's worth noting that neither of these participated in the up move today, which would point to manipulation in my opinion. We have divergence on both the Dow and the Russell compared to the NASDAQ and the SPY. So it seems like tech is leading that. We don't have the same kind of tech participation in the Dow and the Russell versus the SPY and the NASDAQ. So right now, the Russell is sitting just below that resistance. The Dow sitting significantly below resistance and significantly below that most recent high. So we do have divergence there. which is definitely interesting, and the hourly momentums are both to the downside at this point. We didn't talk about it on the previous charts, but the hourly momentum across these charts is to the downside slightly, which is expected. After such a huge up move, you can't continue to gain momentum indefinitely. Eventually, it will slow down. Nothing goes up forever, and you do have to be aware of that, even with these really strong moves like we see here on the Russell and somewhat here on the Dow as well. You do eventually have to retrace some of this move. Moving over to Apple and Tesla. On the 4-hour chart, similar thesis here. Looking at Apple first, just has to be manipulation. Look at this huge move. Went from just below 138 all the way up to 143. Huge move. Well above these resistance lines. Got through it, filled this gap perfectly, and then you have to assume we're at gap resistance and that we're going to be met with some sell demand at this point. And like I mentioned, to me, this looks like manipulation. Tesla, on the other hand, continuing to run into its earnings. Tesla tends to run into earnings. There's excitement around the stock. And then they underperform their earnings, or earnings are at expectation, and the stock is just overbought going into earnings, and it returns to a more normalized price. You could certainly expect this to maybe run another $5 or $6, maybe hit the 200 EMA on the hourly before the Wednesday announcement. But understand you are overbought here. 4-hour is pretty overbought on Tesla. We did get overbought conditions on Apple as well, but we did turn down on that second 4-hour candle of the day, getting us just below the overbought condition. And like I said before, it seems like this is going to start to downtrend at least a little bit here in the next day or two. Moving over to consumer staples and consumer discretionary on the hourly charts. It's worth noting that consumer discretionary continues to participate in this rally. It did make new highs here again today. It did sell off into the end of day, which is interesting. Whereas consumer staples did not really participate, did rally into the midday, and then sold off pretty much all of those gains. Coming back down and filling that gap. Did fill that gap on the open, but then got back down to gap resistance here. And this definitely looks bearish, so it looks like a slight retrace. Wouldn't expect it to get above the 50 EMA on the hourly. And moving over back to consumer discretionary, similarly on momentum, starting to tick down here, starting to tick down on the RSI as well. We do get below the EMA on the RSIs. That would be a pretty good indicator that we're going to be moving lower. That's definitely something that I'm going to be looking for going into tomorrow. Moving over to semiconductors, you just have to start looking at this like a channel. So we have that initial low, we have some highs. You can already see a trend line kind of being built here. We had a higher low, and now we're making a higher high. Trend resistance would be actually up around 250. It is worth noting that we are very extended on the 4-hour. You can see what that looks like on the RSI, well overbought. But it is worth noting that 4-hour momentum is still bullish, despite the down move that we had. A little bit of a retrace to the 21 EMA on Thursday of last week. And then we rallied super aggressively from there. And like I said, we have a price target up here of about 250 based on the trend that we have, making new highs and new lows. And if this continues, then you have to assume that the NASDAQ is going to follow with this trend and that we might be headed for some higher highs in the near future. Moving over to the 10-year yield on the 4-hour chart, we did get the breakout. So we talked about this going into Friday. We got the breakout of resistance. We broke out here before, got above the previous low, but then we made a lower low here, and then we broke out above the trend once again. So now we have a slightly lower high versus that previous high. We do have a bit of a trend line here, and this is definitely interesting. This looks like a little bit of sideways price action. We're not getting a higher high quite yet. Now, this could certainly push up here tomorrow, and if we do get a higher high, that could be interesting. But right now, it seems like we're getting some sideways price action. We have a top up around 3.5%, and we have a low set in here now at 3.33%. And if we do start to go sideways here, that could allow markets to rally a little bit further. But if this does break out here to the upside, that should put pressure on markets. But looking at momentum, looks like the 4-hour might be starting to roll over here a little bit. If we come back in and test the 3.4%, maybe bounce from there, then you're in this sideways chop price action. And that should have a pretty minimal effect on equities and allow them to continue on their trend. Moving over to the dollar, Man, this thing has been stuck in a holding pattern for a while now. Basically 2 weeks in this same area, going all the way back to January 12th. Been in this zone, going sideways. We do have an upper limit of resistance, which we've respected a few times here. We've also retested a lower low on this same trend line, but we bounced back above the 102 level, which continues to hold. And this really just looks interesting. You have to assume that the next move is going to be pretty powerful after this very long holding pattern. And we're really just looking for a break in one way or the other. So if this breaks out to the upside, that should be bad for equities. If this breaks to the downside, that'll be good for equities. And really, we need this to go one way or the other to help make a decision on the markets, because this holding pattern is not really helping anybody. Moving over to JNK, this is really the chart that continues to give me pause and why I really cannot get on board with this up move. It's kind of cost me a lot of money. I definitely got stopped out last week for a pretty decent loss. Took a loss again today, and really this is what's driving me to say that we have to be moving lower. This up move just feels like manipulation. Of course, feels are not a good strategy, but really looking at JNK here on the 4-hour chart as well as the daily chart, JNK is just not participating in this up move like you would want them to if this up move was going to hold up. We have very strong divergence at this point. JNK still has not filled this gap going up to 93.75. And JNK was participating in this rally on this rising wedge that we had, and then it broke down, and JNK's just been sitting in this zone, not telling us one way or the other where they're going. And if you had to pick a direction at this point on JNK, it definitely looks bearish, especially going into the end of the session here on the 4-hour. Looks negative. Daily momentum is ticking down here consistently. It just seems like we have to move lower, and if JNK is moving lower, then you would expect growth to be going with it. But right now, that's just not the case, and that's why I'm probably not doing that well. Probably need to focus more specifically on the Qs if that's what I'm going to trade. But right now, JNK just continues to give me pause here on what's going to be happening into the next week or two. Finishing up with the VIX here on the hourly chart, not a lot to say. We gapped up middle of the session, rallied here slightly, then finished basically unchanged just at this 1981 level. We're still off the lows, so you could argue that we are making a potentially higher low here, and that if this bounces into tomorrow, that should be good if you're bearish. But right now, we're just kind of in a holding pattern. We did have a pretty decent high. We've continued to make higher lows here, but we just can't seem to break out very well. And we're kind of in this wedging pattern here. You can see we had the most recent high wedging down, then we have these higher lows wedging up, and we really need to break one way or the other to help give us some direction. Moving over to my accounts, like I said, I have no positions going into tomorrow. I lost a little bit of money today, about 0.5%. Not great. It's hard for me to get on board with this rally. It just feels really overbought. And like I said with JNK, it just seems like we're going to turn down. It's going to be a pretty aggressive, big down move. I think we might get a rug pull on the markets, and it's causing me to hesitate. I know I really shouldn't be doing that, and I should be trading the trend and just going with what price action is giving me. And I probably need to reset my trading thesis here and take a closer look at my strategy, as it doesn't seem to be working here this year the same way that it was doing last year. Let me know down in the comment section what you think the markets are going to do tomorrow and the next day with the big earnings coming up this week and the FOMC meeting coming in next week. Definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video. I make this video every single day the markets are open, as well as Sundays. So make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.